You may not think of the New England coast as a particularly wild place, but each winter I am filled with awe as a magnificent visitor from the high Arctic arrives each year. For the past few years, I have been working on a photo project to see the world through snowy owl eyes by routinely visiting the same 20-mile stretch of coast during their winter season here. I have found a fascinating world of life and beauty. And this story is about much more than the snowy owl. It's also about the interactions snowies have with the other creatures that make up a web of life in the slivers of protected habitat that remain amid the otherwise developed coastline. I realized that understanding this land and its biodiversity was the key to photographing snowy owls and telling their winter story. Hello, I'm John Welch. Welcome to another episode of How to Find and Photograph. Today, we're here at the beautiful New England coast in the sand dunes, looking for snowy owls. Believe it or not, a few hours ago I found one right here. Let's find out how to find them, how to find out about them, most importantly, how to find them and photograph them ethically, and I'll give you a few photo tips along the way. Let's go. So where exactly can you find snowy owls? My advice is to look for them in areas that resemble the Arctic habitat that they are used to. Between roughly the months of March and October, the snowy owl lives high in the Arctic. The land is open tundra, a largely treeless expanse that is mostly flat with slight natural rises, often near the ocean. During their winter migration season, roughly November through March, you can see that snowy owls will pick habitat that closely resembles what they're used to in the Arctic. In New England, you can see that their clear preference is the coast, which is where our story takes place. Like the Arctic, the land here is a mixture of marshes, dunes, and other flat open areas. You will often find snowy owls perched at the crest of dunes with long lines of sight, on signposts, fences, or even the tops of buildings. Snowy owls prefer these elevated vantage points because they primarily use their excellent distance vision to hunt, and not its hearing. Another phrase to keep in mind is to find the animal, find their food source. Not only is the landscape in New England similar to the Arctic, but the prey they are hunting is similar too. As the snowy owls arrive at the wintering grounds, they will look for territories that offer good hunting opportunities for mice, voles, rabbits, and ducks, among other potential prey. Look for snowies around these possible food sources. Once a snowy owl finds a good territory, it will often fight with other snowies. One morning before sunrise, I got to witness a territorial battle early in the season in the sky. Though the light was pretty low, and I had to have my ISO high, and my shutter speed lower than I would have liked for flight shots, I was able to capture this sequence of a fight. Here's the loser of that fight, not looking so great, though I am not sure if this was an injury she just received in that fight, from a previous injury, or possibly even a deformity. How did I know it was a she? Well, honestly, I'm not totally sure. It is very difficult to identify male versus female snowy owls in New England in winter because most of the visiting owls are juveniles, and male and female juveniles can look the same. All snowy owls start a charcoal gray when they are chicks, and then slowly over time lose that grayness. Then, as they mature, they all start with the speckling. When they become full-grown adults, it is a little easier to tell them apart. Males will typically be more all white without the barring, and females will retain more of that speckled barring that you see here. The other way to tell the difference is the size. Like most other owl species, males are actually smaller than females. But since snowies are loners this time of year, you won't see them next to each other to make that comparison. This snowy was the only one out of dozens I have observed in New England that I can fairly confidently say was a male. So, if you are trying to find and photograph an all-white male in the southern winter range, don't expect to find one. That being said, male and female behavior is basically the same thing this time of year. So all of the previous tips on where to find them apply to both males and females. So now that you've learned where to check, what now? You rush right up to the first owl you see as close as possible, take a picture as close as possible, and then lie about it on social media. Okay, so that's obviously not what we want to do, which leads us to our next topic, ethics. Being an ethical photographer is not only best for the snowy owls, but I think you will get better photos that you can use and be proud of. The first rule is don't get too close. How close is too close? It honestly depends on the individual owl and circumstances. 100 feet is the minimum, but many times, even that might be too close. Pay attention to the owl's behavior to gauge if your distance is comfortable. The owl should be behaving normally, doing things like slowly rotating its head and scanning, preening, looking relaxed, yawning, or just playing with things in its environment. Some signs that you are too close is if the owl is staring directly at you, spinning its head frantically or very fast, lifting up its back tail feathers, which indicate it's about to take flight and flush. Flushing wastes energy for owls and disrupts hunts. If nothing else, it's in your best interest as a photographer not to flush the owl, because you won't have the owl to photograph anymore, and that flight shot you've been dreaming of, all you're going to get is a picture of his butt flying away. Being ethical will actually help you get better flight shots. Snowy owls are most active hunting around sunrise and sunset, and will be less tolerant of human approach at this time. Keeping a longer distance between you and the owl will actually improve your chances of getting a more natural flight shot with the owl facing you instead of fleeing you. Owls and raptors take off into the direction of the wind, so take a position with the wind at your back. I followed these two principles, extra distance and wind awareness, in this flight scenario. I set up very far away. It seemed that the owl was just a dot even at 600 millimeters. But remember, as the owl flies closer, it will get bigger in the frame. So starting at a far distance actually can produce a tight shot because the owl will actually fly towards you, as it did in this sequence. Another factor I considered here was that I had spent time with this owl, and I knew that it would fly towards the jetty, which was also in this direction. Here is another scenario. I did the same thing with the wind, but also guessed that the owl was hunting in these dunes and not in the beach directly behind it, where there were already people walking around. A final thing to keep in mind is that all of the seemingly close-up portraits you see on social media are actually crops taken with a 600mm or even more. I think it is part of ethics to explain this, to set people's expectations about how close they should be getting. Here is an example of basically the closest I've ever been to a snowy owl and have it be done so in an ethical fashion where the owl was totally comfortable. And here's what that shot looked like cropped on Instagram. I was careful to explain that I had cropped it and shot it with a 600mm. As you can see in the clip, the owl remained comfortable, as they are typically more tolerant during the daytime sleepy roosting phase, as I call it. My second photo tip is to create environmental images, not just tight portraits. Once I realized that ethics extends to the subliminal messages conveyed by the kinds of images I made public, I began to challenge myself in this photo project to stay farther away and create environmental images, where the owl was smaller in frame in order to tell the story of its environment. To round out the story, I decided to include more dedicated landscape shots of these habitats. New England isn't the Arctic, but sometimes it can feel like it. with snowdrifts covering the land and temperatures drop so low that sea smoke forms as the moisture from the relatively warmer ocean meets the sub-zero Fahrenheit air. Unlike this wildlife, snowies are built for this cold and have adaptations like feather-covered feet and rictal bristles that cover their beaks, possibly to warm the air before breathing it in. Their thick feathers have the second best thermal conductance among birds in the world, only behind the Adeline penguin, and snowies will fluff them up to trap more pockets of air to increase their insulating value. I felt that placing the snowy owl in this Arctic-looking environment helped to communicate these cold weather survival abilities. As I spent hours observing snowy owls in these landscapes, I realized that the snowy owl was not alone in this habitat. I decided to expand my snowy owl project to include photographing the other species with whom they shared this land, to communicate their interdependence and relationships. Snowies have a lot of competition for their desired prey. Other native raptors, like merlins, prey on small birds much better. Lucky for this horned lark, he was able to outmaneuver the fastest bird in the world. But the main rival of the snowy, from my observation in this 20-mile stretch of land, was clearly the northern harrier hawk, as you saw in the first clip. I have witnessed several harriers dive bomb different snowy owls. I knew that snowy owls were capable of preying on hawks and other owls, but one day I realized it wasn't just that. As I learned, they are both rivals for the same prey. You're looking at a rabbit that this harrier caught first. Then, this snowy stole it for about 20 minutes, and then the harrier got it back. It makes sense that they are rivals. Both hunt the marshes. In fact, the harrier's nickname is the marsh hawk. And the dunes. And also the ocean, too. I loved observing and photographing this graceful flyer as it seemed to appear out of nowhere as it glides low over the marshes and changes course mid-air, only to launch into graceful dives. The snowy isn't the only Arctic migrant that this land provides suitable habitat for and sustains through the winter. To be honest, I'm a little embarrassed to say that even though I've lived in New England my whole life and been an avid outdoorsman, I didn't realize these species were from the Arctic usually. It was over the course of this snowy owl project that I noticed them and began to research them. That just goes to show that if you spend time in nature, you might realize that there were wonders right at your doorstep that you never knew about. If one link in the biodiversity that makes up this web is damaged or compromised, we might not have the snowy owl as a winter visitor anymore. I know these weren't really photo tips in the sense of camera settings. Photography is more than just technical. Expanding your vision and creativity for the story you tell is even more important. Thank you so much for watching this episode. I hope you enjoyed it and got some value in it. If you liked it, please consider subscribing and give this video a like. Until next time, find out more so you can find more.